A 17-year-old is now charged with murdering her mother and stepfather in Carrollton. Investigators say Sarah Grace Patrick is the one who killed James and Kristen Brock in their home in February. Channel 2's Candace McCowan is outside the jail where the teen who is being charged as an adult is being held now. Candace?
Yeah, and Wendy, this is tragic no matter how you look at it. From the couple's 5-year-old daughter who is said to have found their bodies to the 7 children that the couple had between the 2 of them and their combined family. Now those 7 children each without one of their parents. And one of those children is now behind bars here at the Carroll County Jail charged with the murders.
The beginning of any case, everyone's a suspect. From the very moment the 911 call was received, a relentless investigation began.
And it is the person who called 911 who is now charged with the shooting deaths of James and Kristen Brock in their home on Carrollton Tyus Road in February. 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick is now charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault in connection with the deaths of her mother and stepfather.
She turned herself in because we notified her she had warrants for her arrest.
Investigators say the evidence led them to charging the teen, including the speech of Sarah speaking at her mother and stepfather's funeral that's posted on Facebook.
Although there's nothing we can do to bring them back, we still have control over how we treat people.
And they say it's part of her covering up what happened.
Considering that she didn't just immediately tell us what happened, yes. But who knows what's going on in a young person's mind like that.
And while there's been a more than 4.5-month wait for an arrest, investigators say it took time to build the case.
Don't you want the right person arrested? So that's why it takes so long. These diligent investigators took their time. We've got the person that we believe orchestrated this and committed this horrific crime.
And I asked investigators today if there had been any prior calls with law enforcement to that house between the teen and her mother and stepfather. They said that there had not been any. They are still working to figure out exactly the motive here. For now, live here outside the Carroll County Jail, I'm Candace McCowan for Channel 2 Action News.
On February 20th, 2025, a quiet Georgia town woke to a nightmare. Inside a modest family home, 41-year-old Kristen Brock and her husband, 45-year-old James Brock, were found shot to death in their own bed. The alleged killer was the very girl who called 911, their daughter, 17-year-old Sarah Grace Patrick. Kristen Brock was described as protective, the kind of mother who always put her children first. Friends say she loved cooking for her family, volunteering at school events, and singing in her church choir. James Brock, Kristen's husband and Sarah's stepfather, was known as Steady, a hardworking man, a family man. He loved sports, backyard cookouts, and family gatherings. Together, Kristen and James were raising 2 daughters, Sarah, a teenager navigating high school, and her little sister, just 6 years old. By all accounts, they were a family like any other. But behind closed doors, tensions may have been rising. Sarah Grace Patrick was born in Georgia in 2007. She was raised in Carrollton, a church-going community where everyone seemed to know everyone else. At school, she was seen as outgoing. Friends describe her as funny, talkative, and creative. But Sarah was also living online. On TikTok, she posted videos of herself dancing, lip-syncing, and sharing pieces of her life. For most, Sarah looked like a typical teenager. But investigators would later claim her digital footprint told a very different story. On the night of February 19, 2025, the Brock family went to bed. Kristen and James turned off their lights. Their daughters settled in. In the early hours of February 20th, shots rang out. According to prosecutors, Sarah walked into her parents' bedroom and pulled the trigger. Moments later, her 6-year-old sister made the horrifying discovery. Her mother and stepfather were lifeless. It was Sarah who picked up the phone and dialed 911. 911 call plays again, faint under narration. Police rushed to the home. What they found inside shocked even seasoned investigators. Detectives in interview rooms, evidence boards covered in photos, phone logs, TikTok screenshots. From the beginning, something about Sarah's story didn't add up. Detectives combed through her devices. They found what they described as mountains of evidence, both physical and digital. TikTok videos recorded after the murders, posts that cast Sarah not just as a victim, but as a central character in her own dark narrative. She reached out to true crime influencers, offering intel on her parents' murders. She said their story could be a big hit. The more investigators dug, the more their suspicion grew. At her mother's funeral, Sarah delivered an emotional speech.
For those of you who do not know me, my name is Sarah, and I am Kristen Brock's daughter and James Brock's stepdaughter. This isn't easy. I don't know how family to do this all the time, but I'm really happy I get to do this. But just bear with me because I stutter a lot. I just wanted to say goodbye to my mom and Jamie since we never got the chance to. I was so used to you guys always being here to the point that I never once thought to imagine y'all not being here. I didn't have a single clue how much I needed y'all until now. For James, thank you for all the life lessons you taught me and for being the best bonus dad ever. Your heart will finally be healed in heaven and neither of y'all will be in any pain anymore. Although that gives me so much comfort, your fight was not supposed to end there. And for my mother, everything we went through does not define what kind of person or what kind of mother you were. You were a beautiful, kind soul with so much gratitude and so gosh dang strong. And you taught me so many life lessons, and some that you just recently taught me were through a letter you sent to James in 2018. When I first read it, I smiled and I cried, and I got chill bumps. But every single time I read it, it puts me to a lot of peace. So I thought I would share it. May 23rd, 2018. Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. The wrong one will find you in peace and leave you in pieces, but the right one will find you in pieces and lead you to peace. We can't always choose the music the life plays for us, but you can choose how we dance to it. She was always dancing to her own beat, LOL. And keep in mind, she wrote that herself. Eventually, all the pieces fall into place, but until then, laugh at the confusion, live for the moment, and know that everything happens for a reason. I can choose to let it define me, confine me, refine me, outshine me, or I can choose to move on and leave it behind me. Always, Kristen Brock. Considering that gave me so much closure, I want to remember them for who they were and not what happened to them, and be happy for the time we got to spend together and not sad about the time that we don't. I may always and will always be her sunshine, but she will always be my star from up above. And I know at nighttime I can go and look at Mama and Jamie in the sky, and gladly they will save me a seat in heaven like they saved for me. I'm sorry. Gladly they will save a seat for me in heaven like they saved a seat for me in this very church. Although there's nothing we can do to bring them back, we still have control over how we treat people with us today. Therefore, when someone tries to tell you anything, no matter how important it could be, just listen, because you never know when it's somebody's time to go. You can say goodnight and wake up a few hours just to find out they aren't there, despite their joy and their love. So just listen, and never take a hug or anyone or anything for granted, and love with all that you have in you like they did. And lastly, my take on not taking people for granted. I want to thank my family, also known as my catafam, my grandparents, my siblings, Jaylee, Johnny, Jaden, Jojo, Trent, Tristan, Ashley, and Jesse for helping me get through my worst nightmare. And last but not least, I want to thank Tasha, Bree, Nate, Lane, Kimberly Hayes, Kim Bowling, Katie, and most of all, my father, Angie, and Ben for making such a big difference. Jamie and Mama would have thanked y'all too. I love you guys, and so do they. I'm sorry.
Witnesses say she sobbed, her hands trembled. To many in the room, it felt genuine. But others would later wonder, was it grief or performance? On TikTok, Sarah posted about her loss, some clips mournful, others cryptic. For investigators, the posts raised red flags. For nearly 5 months, Sarah remained free. But in July of 2025, she walked into the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. With her biological father by her side, she surrendered. She was arrested and charged as an adult. 8 counts in all, including malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, and possession of a firearm during a felony. The teenager once known for her TikToks was now facing life in prison. Inside the courtroom, Sarah showed two sides. At first, she smiled. She hugged her attorneys. Supporters in the gallery wore T-shirts reading, "I stand with Sarah." But when testimony began, Sarah broke. She sobbed as a caregiver described her as kind, faithful, and gentle. The judge agreed. Bond was denied. Sarah would remain behind bars. The case split Carrollton. Some demanded justice for Kristen and James. They saw Sarah as manipulative, even dangerous. Others insisted she was misunderstood, a girl broken by circumstances outsiders could never understand. In living rooms, churches, and schools, the town was left asking what really happened in that house. A grand jury indicted Sarah Grace Patrick on 8 counts. She pleaded not guilty. Her arraignment was scheduled for September 22, 2025. Her trial set for January 5, 2026. A teenager's fate now hangs in the balance. Was Sarah Grace Patrick a grieving daughter or a cold-blooded killer? As the courtroom prepares for trial, one truth remains clear. 2 lives are gone, a family is shattered, and a community will never be the same. Sarah Grace Patrick was born in 2007 in Carrollton, Georgia, a small but growing town where neighbors waved to each other in grocery store aisles, and Friday night football games were still the heartbeat of the community. Her early life seemed ordinary. Teachers at her elementary school remembered her as bright, curious, and eager to please. She loved to read, often checking out stacks of books from the school library, mysteries, fantasy adventures, and even true crime stories that fascinated her at a young age. At recess, Sarah wasn't the loudest child on the playground, but she was social. Friends remembered her as the one who always wanted to make people laugh. She was imaginative, even theatrical. If there was a school play, Sarah wanted a part. By middle school, Sarah began to lean heavily into social media. While other kids might have hidden their lives, Sarah shared hers, recording silly dances, posting jokes, and lip-syncing to popular songs. She loved the idea of an audience. Friends say she dreamed of becoming famous online. Fame, even in a small way, seemed like an escape. One former classmate recalled, she'd say stuff like, "I'm gonna blow up on TikTok. Y'all are gonna see." She wasn't joking. She wanted that more than anything. At home, life wasn't always easy. Sarah's mother, Kristen, was protective, some say strict. Kristen was deeply involved in her daughters' lives, from school activities to church groups. She believed in structure, rules, and responsibility. Her husband, James Brock, Sarah's stepfather, shared that philosophy. He wanted Sarah to focus on her education, to stay out of trouble, and to keep her head clear of distractions. But Sarah was a teenager in a digital world. Her passions weren't always the same as her parents' expectations. She loved music, dance, and the idea of telling her own story online. At Central High School, Sarah wasn't a star athlete, but she was well known. She was outgoing, always cracking jokes in the hallways. Teachers described her as smart, but sometimes distracted. She joined the dance team briefly, though friends say she cared more about recording videos of herself practicing than the actual performances. She loved fashion, thrift shopping with friends, experimenting with new styles, and showing off outfits on TikTok. Her friends said Sarah could be deeply caring one day and distant the next. A classmate remembered, she was fun, but sometimes she had this heaviness, like she wanted people to know she was struggling but didn't want to say why. At sleepovers, Sarah sometimes confided in friends about fights at home. She complained about arguments with her mom, normal teenage frustrations, some thought. Others weren't so sure. One girl recalled Sarah once saying, "I feel trapped here. Nobody gets me." Still, Sarah seemed like any other 17-year-old. She laughed, she danced, she dreamed about the future. She talked about wanting to travel, about maybe becoming an influencer or even a journalist. But in the weeks leading up to February 2025, Sarah's posts took a darker turn. Her captions grew vague, moody. She hinted at pain. She spoke about her life like a movie, one where she wasn't just living it, but directing it. Her TikToks, investigators later revealed, weren't just entertainment. They were evidence. Some were filmed in the days after Kristen and James were killed. Videos of Sarah dancing, lip-syncing, even joking, while her parents' deaths hung unsolved in the background. Then came the messages to influencers. True crime creators began receiving anonymous tips. The sender claimed to have inside knowledge about the murders. The tips were detailed, eerie, and strangely performative. When investigators traced those messages back, they led to Sarah. By then, the community was already suspicious. Her emotional breakdowns at her mother's funeral seemed raw to some, but to others, they looked staged. The contradictions kept piling up. Her biological father defended her, saying Sarah was being unfairly painted as a monster. Supporters online echoed the same, calling her a misunderstood teenager who made mistakes, but not a killer. Meanwhile, detectives and prosecutors said the evidence was overwhelming. They pointed to the gun, to the posts, to the timeline. In interviews, Sarah appeared calm at first. She joked with detectives. She asked about her phone. She didn't seem panicked. But as the reality set in, she began to break. Tears came. Silence followed. By July, Sarah turned herself in, escorted by her father. Cameras captured the moment. She walked in with her head down, hair covering her face. A teenager caught between two worlds, the digital one she created and the brutal reality of the one she lived in. In court, Sarah's story unfolded like a drama. On one side, prosecutors painted her as calculating, a young woman who wanted control, who wanted attention, who executed her parents in cold blood. On the other side, the defense argued she was a child, a 17-year-old under immense pressure, misunderstood, and perhaps manipulated by forces in her life that went unseen. The community was torn. Vigils were held for Kristen and James, candles lighting up the night in Carrollton. Friends described them as the kind of people who didn't deserve such an ending. But at the same time, rallies appeared for Sarah. Teenagers wore T-shirts with her name. Online, hashtags spread, some calling for justice for Kristen and James, others demanding mercy for Sarah. The case became not just about one family, but about the clash between generations, between parents who lived one way and children growing up in an entirely different world, shaped by likes, shares, and followers. Now, Sarah Grace Patrick sits in a jail cell, awaiting trial. She is 17. She faces life in prison. Her younger sister, just 6 years old, will grow up without her parents. And depending on the outcome, she may grow up without her sister as well. A family torn apart, a community divided, and a nation left asking, how does a teenager go from dancing on TikTok to standing accused of double murder? The trial will seek answers, but no matter the verdict, one truth remains unshakable. 2 lives have been lost, a child's future hangs in the balance, and Carrollton, Georgia, will never forget the name Sarah Grace Patrick. The trial of Sarah Grace Patrick began under intense public scrutiny. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, and every seat inside the courtroom was filled. Journalists, grieving relatives, curious locals, and even teenagers who had once gone to school with Sarah. The atmosphere was heavy. This was no ordinary case. A 17-year-old girl was accused of murdering the very people who raised her. The prosecution wasted no time setting the stage. In opening statements, the district attorney looked directly at the jury and said, "This case is about betrayal. A daughter who turned on the 2 people who loved her most. She planned it, she executed it, and then she bragged about it." They promised the jury they would hear not just evidence, but Sarah's own voice. In TikTok videos, in messages to influencers, in comments left online. They said those digital breadcrumbs revealed not a grieving daughter, but someone who relished the attention that followed. The defense, led by a seasoned attorney with decades of experience, told a very different story. "Sarah is not a monster," he said firmly. "She is a child, a 17-year-old who grew up in a world we don't fully understand. A world where reality and performance are blurred, where social media becomes not just an outlet, but a trap. You will see that Sarah has been painted into a role she never intended to play, and we will prove that the state's story is not the truth." From the very first witness, the emotional weight of the case was undeniable. Friends of Kristen Patrick, Sarah's mother, testified about Kristen's devotion to her daughters. One friend held back tears as she described Kristen as the kind of mom who always showed up, always the one bringing snacks to school events, always asking how the kids were doing. Another witness, a neighbor, said she often heard arguments inside the Patrick household, raised voices, slammed doors. She admitted she couldn't make out words, but it was clear the tension between Sarah and her parents had been growing. The prosecution called Sarah's classmates. A girl who once danced with her on the cheer team said, "She wanted to be famous. She talked about it every day, but sometimes she'd say stuff like she hated her life at home, like she couldn't stand being there." Then came the digital evidence. Prosecutors projected Sarah's TikTok videos onto a large screen. The jury watched as Sarah danced, lip-synced, and smiled into the camera. Just hours, prosecutors claimed, after Kristen and James had been killed. The videos were chilling in their context. The prosecution hammered that point home. "Ladies and gentlemen, does this look like grief? Or does this look like celebration?" Gasps filled the courtroom as prosecutors played audio messages allegedly sent by Sarah to online acquaintances. In them, she hinted at having done something big. She hinted at knowing details no one else could know. The defense countered with their own narrative. They argued that Sarah's videos were not celebrations but coping mechanisms, that her online bravado was a mask, the way a teenager, confused and broken, tried to hide her fear. They called experts to the stand. A psychologist testified about adolescent brain development, explaining how 17-year-olds often lack the ability to fully grasp the consequences of their actions. She was living in two realities, the expert said, the physical reality of her family life and the digital reality of social media. Sometimes those lines blur, with devastating consequences. The defense also pointed to possible inconsistencies in the forensic timeline. They suggested investigators rushed to judgment, too eager to blame Sarah when other possibilities had not been fully explored. Sarah herself was a presence throughout the trial. At first, she sat still, her hair hanging into her face, avoiding eye contact with the jury. But as the days went on, cracks appeared. During one particularly damning testimony, where a digital forensics expert described how her messages were traced directly to her phone, Sarah broke down in tears. Her shoulders shook, and she buried her face in her hands. At other times, she seemed detached, staring into the distance, scribbling in a notebook, occasionally glancing at the cameras in the room as though still aware of her invisible audience. The most emotional moment came when Sarah's biological father was called to testify for the defense. He spoke softly, his voice trembling. "My daughter is not a killer. She is a child. She made mistakes, yes, but she loved her mother. She loved James. She is not what they're saying she is." Jurors watched as Sarah wept openly, mouthing "I love you" to her father across the courtroom. The prosecution, however, reminded the jury that love and violence can coexist. People kill those they claim to love all the time. Do not let sentiment cloud your judgment. Closing arguments painted two starkly different pictures. For the prosecution, Sarah was cold, calculated, and obsessed with her own image. They asked the jury to think of the 6-year-old sister left behind, now parentless because of Sarah's choices. For the defense, Sarah was a troubled teen caught in a perfect storm of adolescent turmoil, strict parenting, and a digital culture that thrives on shock and spectacle. They argued she was incapable of fully understanding what she had done. As the trial neared its end, the weight of the decision hung heavy in the courtroom. The jury would not only decide Sarah's fate, but also shape the narrative of a tragedy that had already divided a community and captured national attention. Sarah Grace Patrick sat silently, eyes fixed on the floor, as the courtroom fell into tense silence, waiting for a verdict that could send her to prison for life or offer her a chance at redemption.